And until you deal with those two issues, the health care, which is the bigger issue, and then Social Security, the rest of the work that you do to try to narrow up on other departmental expenses is so much smaller. We have to deal with that, and not only at a federal level, but at the state level. Those increases in costs are simply pushing the important investments on so many things we can do to create jobs, which will then again grow more revenue. The last I would do is that I think we all need as citizens to be far more aware, and so I'd be speaking a lot each year about how much total government spending is going up per year. We often read about these things in retrospect, that, gee, it went up 30% during this person's administration and 15%. American public needs to know how much it's going up every year. And we need to be talking to our representatives about the fact that we don't think that's a fiscally prudent model and that we want to see jobs growth. And so we want to hear from you, what are you going to do to grow jobs, private jobs, not just government jobs?
Sandy, how are you?
Good.
You spoke a little bit about regulation earlier. There are lots of government officials that, particularly in the financial sector, talk about increased regulation now because the values of that sector seem to have gone out of whack. Eaton is a values-centered company. How do we get the market to self-adjust based on values that we all feel are important values that Americans and American businesses ought to have in our country?
I actually think that, and I've always felt this, I think the majority of people in any setting, whether it's a for-profit or non-profit or it's a member of the government, are people who are trying to do the right thing. I really do. You always have some circumstance where you've got some fringe, some place that goes off reservation, if you will. I think the more important part of this last business cycle really got to be the simultaneous liquidity crunch that occurred in the fall of 2008 that I think caught both the banking industry, worldwide banking industry, and important regulators of that industry somewhat by surprise in terms of how interconnected it was. And in some ways, you can look back and try to say, how did this happen? The tremendous sophistication and the growth of very, very complex instruments that had preceded that downturn over 10 years, I think outpaced the ability of regulators to be able to see the transparent information on a frequent enough basis. And so many of the portions of the financial regulatory bill, which is moving very quickly at this point, are very appropriate in terms of trying to give more transparency, more regular opportunity for oversight. There are other elements that were in that particular bill which had absolutely nothing to do with financial regulatory reform. And so this is again where I would say, what problem are we trying to solve? And if we always ask that question about our legislation, hopefully we can keep it a little bit narrower. I mean, to give you an example, there were over, I don't remember the exact number, but over 10 very important corporate governance elements that are in the financial regulatory bill. And in my opinion, and the opinion of many people I respect, these should have been two separate bills. Let's address the issues that are necessary to be sure that we have a viable and credible and liquid financial system around the world with the appropriate safeguards and transparency. And then if there are needs for reforms in corporate governance, let's debate those publicly under the day of light and be sure that they make sense as well, and don't mandate that every company do things the same way, whether you're in the financial industry or you're manufacturing or you're transportation. Those are the types of things I think cause many of us some concern that when you see these bills as to how much is simply added on to them and then they're not publicly debated. Generally those types of decisions, whether they're made in business or not, you need all the voices at the table to make good informed decisions. So that's where our concern would be. But I do think there are real lessons to come out of this last downturn because we all learned how interconnected the credit industry is. And as I mentioned in my comments, credit is fundamental to growth. And that we're seeing it for many small businesses around the country in the U.S. today, whether they're customers of ours or they're suppliers, they're struggling with the credit availability. And part of the reason for the credit availability is that we've tried to raise reserves quite a bit for all the financial institutions. We've raised their lending requirements substantially, and everyone is still a bit cautious because this history of just a year and a half ago is still near. So again, there are consequences for each of these decisions, and I think we need to talk about them more.
Mr. Cutler, in talking about the global landscape and trying to keep the U.S. A competitive location for companies, you used two terms that were unfamiliar to me, and I sense I will be pushing you onto terrain that you know very well. You spoke of a territorial tax system and a world tax system. I don't know the difference. If you could educate me, I'd appreciate it.
Probably the easiest way to think about this is that if we sell product, let me just say if we sold product in Czechoslovakia, we would be taxed on selling that product in Czechoslovakia. And then when we bring the cash back to the United States, we're also taxed at the U.S. tax rate. If we were a French company, or a UK company, or a German company, or 27 other country type companies, you would be taxed on the Czechoslovakian rate, and you wouldn't be taxed in your home country. So the U.S. and 4 other countries in the U.S. in the world have what we call this world tax system that has a double tax, and the other countries don't have anywhere near the outward flow of capital that we do trying to invest elsewhere. So if you think of the world on sort of the old, what they call the mercantile model, how are you going to do well in competing around the world? We think you've got to compete with what other countries have done to arm up their companies with this ability to compete in the local country as if they were a local competitor. Now, the benefit we get back in the U.S. is you're going to create jobs here. There will be income taxes for all the people who work at the company there. I mean, so there is a tax benefit to it. But if you choke it off at the point of creation, you aren't going to get any of those jobs back at home. That's the difference. There are a lot of other subtle pieces to it, but worldwide tax versus territorial tax. Does that address your question? Yeah, okay.
Mr. Cutler, I've been a resident of the city of Cleveland all my life, with the exception of the 6 years I spent in the U.S. Army. But it grieves me to see a Fortune 500 company such as yours abandoning the city with its empty buildings, hundreds of acres of fallow land for the suburbs of the green space, which we love so much. Will you comment on that, please?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for your service. We all appreciate that. In terms of I think you're referring not subtly to our move of our headquarters. So I think I got that point. We've been headquartered. Many of you know we were headquartered in East Cleveland, moved downtown to the Erie View building back in, I guess that was early 70s. We moved 2 blocks south to our current location in '84, if I recall, and we're now moving several miles east in a couple of years. Our company's grown a lot. One of our challenges is, as many of you know, we rent our space in our current building. We're not the owner of that building. And we can't get enough space to handle all the people we have. So we spent several years looking around at sites in the greater Cleveland area. We very much wanted to stay here. And that was our real decision. And there were not many places where we could fit. We're bringing several sites together in one location. We think it will create an absolutely outstanding location, not only for our customers, but for all of our employees, and ensures that we've got a major presence here in Cleveland, which was our objective. So I'm proud of what our employees do every day in Cleveland in terms of the number of boards that were involved. Barry's here. How many boards, Barry? Yeah, we serve on 84 boards in this community. A very large proportion of our charitable contributions are made here as well, and that will continue. So you have to come out a little further to see us, but we'll be here in the city.